Hello, fellow travelers. I'm Dr. Hector. Welcome to Soucouyant, a Caribbean supernatural tale, where we reimagine the Soucouyant, a character from the folklore of the Caribbean. Here we follow her as she is depicted in Trinidad. Her depiction might be different in other places in the Caribbean. Well, fellow travelers, here we are at episode 20, Soucouyant, a Caribbean supernatural tale, two of the kind. In the previous episode, Mrs. Lee saw her husband for the first time since his penance began. She could tell that he had already changed. She saw the dread in his eyes as he prepared to spend the night at the Chinese Association. She wanted to join him there and help him through whatever it was he was going through. The store was thriving and the workers were happy. She was terrified and anxious. He was miserable and past terrified. Mrs. Margarita meets another popular figure in Trinidad folklore, Papa Bois. In the folklore, he is kind but aloof and rarely encountered, so we get to meet him more closely than he is generally depicted. She picked up the night deposit bag when she heard him leaving the office. Mrs. Lee was holding his arm. His eyes held the dread that she saw all week. He took the bag and turned to his wife and said, "I am going now." "I want to come with you." "No, please, don't come to the Chinese Association with me and don't bring the children there." "But, Jenny, we spent all afternoon talking about this. I can't stand the thought of what I have to endure. You watching me go through it will make it worse. And no, you can't do anything to help me." I know. You said it over and over. But at least let me try." "Nothing to try. I told you already. I tried and tried. I've been trying all week." "But 'twas She never used his name in public. "Shh, Jenny, I'm sorry. I truly am. But I brought this on myself. I have to go through it by myself." He turned to Margarita and took the bag she held out to him. He released himself from his wife's grip and turned to the workers and said, "Okay." His voice cracked, and he began again after clearing his throat. "Okay, everybody. Put away everything. The store looks wonderful. I'll see you tomorrow." "May I drive you there at least?" asked his wife. He shook his head. "Please, she pleaded. He shook his head again without speaking. Then he turned and walked quickly out the door. Her hand slipped from his arm to his forearm, then to his hand she tried to hold. He gave hers a quick squeeze, then released it, while she still held on. He pulled his hand away determinedly. She reluctantly let go of his fingers. He didn't look at her. He kept his head turned to the street outside. As he took 2 steps, she started to lurch for him, but Margarita firmly held her arm and pulled her back. She turned to Margarita. Margarita caught her breath at the visage of terrible confusion and pain. The workers and Mrs. Lee watched in silence as he crossed the street to the other side and turned the corner of Charlotte Street and was out of sight. Then a small scream followed by sobs escaped from Mrs. Lee. The workers gathered around to comfort her. Margarita held her and walked her back to the office. A few customers in the store witnessed the dramatic exchange as they walked to the cashier. One of the workers went to the register and said, "I'll help you." She rang up the purchase and put it in a bag. The customer asked what the matter was, but the worker just smiled and said nothing. She gave the lady her bag, who took it and left with a curious look back at the office. On witnessing the worker politely decline to discuss the dramatic interaction, the other customers paid for their purchases and left without asking questions. Kaihua also saw Tua Utsa turn onto Charlotte Street as she was walking back to the store with the Chinese food. Knowing the first time Mrs. Lee saw her husband would be dramatic, she brought lots of food for everyone. She nodded to the security guard as she entered the store and whispered to him to close the store. She said aloud as she was walking in, "Hello, ladies. Let's close early today. Let's eat. I brought enough food for everyone." She carried 2 plastic bags of food she put on the counter. She was followed by a young man who carried 4 sacks. He asked permission to put the sacks on the counter next to the 2. She nodded and gave him a tip. He thanked her and nodded to the other workers. "Thank you, ma'am. Enjoy the food, everyone," he said as he left. There was a chorus of thank yous and "you're welcome." "Come on, ladies, let's lay out this food. One of the bags has paper plates and plastics, knives and forks," said Kaiwa. She began opening a bag, and the warm smell of delicious food quickly spread through the store. Kaiwa motioned the security guard to come over and join the group. He joined them and began opening sacks as well. The last 2 customers gathered their children and came to the counter to pay for their cloth and left with smile on their faces. The guard pulled the gate closed behind them. The workers opened takeout containers by removing their styrofoam lids or unfolding the cardboard flaps. The containers were filled with white rice, fried rice, fat, flat noodles, chicken cooked various ways, orange chicken, compound chicken, stewed chicken. They also had beef dishes and pork dishes, as well as several bags filled with fortune cookies. 3 employees formed a serving line and spread out the containers. The others filed by and chose what they wanted. Soon everyone had a plate and found a convenient place to sit or rest the plate while standing, as long as they were in a tight group enjoying the same conversation and eating. The guard did not join the group. He opted for just white rice and sauteed vegetables. He took his plate and sat away from the ladies. Light from the doorway and skylight bathed him. Someone beckoned him to join the group. He politely declined, saying he wanted to sit in the sun because of the air condition. His response was not unusual because many people had that attitude, so it did not seem remarkable or out of place. The ladies were assured that he was not feeling left out. On his words, a small smile briefly touched the corners of Kaiwa's mouth, and she looked up at the guard, who sat with the plate in his hand but was not eating. Only Margarita noticed the exchange. She looked from Kaiwa to the guard and back. She dropped the serving spoon she was holding. It clattered on the tiled floor. Margarita was unnerved and flustered. She knew she was in the presence of not 1, but 2 of Kaiwa's kind. Kaiwa picked up the spoon and set it on the table. She gently patted and made a single soft stroke on Margarita's forearm without speaking. Margarita smiled and nodded to her. Any of the ladies who saw the exchange thought Margarita was simply acknowledging that Kaiwa picked up the spoon. They didn't know that Kaiwa fortified Margarita. Kaiwa said loudly, "I hope this tastes as good as it smells." A chorus of approval went up from the ladies. Margarita sat on a bowl of cloth and began eating with her chopsticks. She nodded, along with the hums and nods of the other workers. Mrs. Lee was also using chopsticks to eat. She swallowed and started a conversation about her husband. "Yes, it's delicious. But what is going on with Tony? What am I going to do?" The workers looked at each other, but none responded. Kaiwa replied, Cousin, I don't know. But he appears to be moving in the right direction for growth by doing his penance. He does seem more considerate," said Mrs. Lee. "You noticed that," said Kaiwa. "It's a good sign. I'm sure he'll get better and be a better person than he was." I hope so," said Mrs. Lee. "I know so," responded Kaiwa. "Oh, cousin, your words are so reassuring. They really give me hope. Thank you." "Well, it's not false hope," said Kaiwa with a smile. Margarita stole a quick look at the security guard. He was looking directly at her and still not appeared to have touched the food on his plate. She smiled and nodded. He returned a small nod with a gentle smile on his lips. The waning sunlight burnished his brown skin. She noted how smooth his complexion was. His complexion was like lightly stained mahogany. Margarita focused again on her plate. Similar to the god, Kaiwa was looking at her also with a smile. Margarita felt her pulse racing and could feel her heart pounding. Kaiwa touched her arm and asked, "Miss Margarita, how are you so quiet? Don't you like the food?" "I more than like it. I'm too busy to talk." She cleared her throat before she answered. She replied as she felt her heartbeat returning to normal. Her anxiety turned to a sense of privilege. She was acknowledged by two of the kind. The kind was a term she adopted from Kaiwa, who used it to refer to herself and her community. She wondered if the term was another of Kaiwa's clever witticism that alluded to humankind or mankind. It was amusing because Kaiwa thought unkindness was too widespread. Everyone but the guard ate heartily. The workers with children present made sure the kids had enough to eat. The camaraderie even affected Mrs. Lee, who set aside her troubles for a moment. After the meal, the workers helped clean up and those with children left soon. Everyone that wanted to take leftovers was able to take food with them. Margarita was the last worker with Kaiwa and the guard. He closed the door and locked the store. She stood waiting and no longer able to look directly at the guard. He set down the untouched plate and asked, "What is it, my child?" Margarita looked at Kaiwa, who smiled at her and nodded. Kaiwa ushered Margarita to the guard with an upward palm gesture. Margarita turned and looked directly at the guard for the first time, rather than the furtive glimpses. She approached him and genuflected, Papa, I'm...
Kaiwa speaks highly of you and gave you friendship, so I wanted to meet you myself.
Papa, I don't know what to say.
Do you know who I am, friend Margarita?
No, Papa, I can only guess.
Tell us your best guess then, friend Margarita.
I think you are Papa Bois, protector of the forest.
That is 100% correct. How did you guess?
Margarita felt her knees turn to jelly. Kaiwa touched her gently and steadied her. Margarita did not even realize that Kaiwa was standing by her. Margarita replied, "You declined meat and didn't even eat your rice and vegetables."
Anything else?
He asked. You sat in the sunlight like a tree and your complexion is like polished wood."
You are perceptive and observant.
Margarita did not speak. She did not know how to engage in banter with Papa Bois. She was barely getting used to Kaiwa. Instead, she genuflected again with her eyes on the floor. Papa Bois laughed and said,
I know you had a full day with a lot of astounding information.
"She certainly has," said Kaiwa. "I'm impressed by her grace. You are doing wonderfully, Miss Margarita." "I still haven't digested all of this, Mama." "Kaiwa, still just Kaiwa," encouraged Kaiwa. "I still have not taken in everything, Kaiwa," said Margarita. "I don't know how I will react when I'm traveling home tonight. Maybe all of this will hit me then."
Well, you are in special company with Kaiwa, Miss Margarita,
said Papa Bois, approaching her with outstretched hand to shake. Margarita shook his hand. Her hand was shaking as he enveloped it in his. Instantly, she felt calm, with a soothing warmth. Her self-confidence reasserted itself. She looked at his name tag and could not suppress a giggle, then said, "So nice to meet you, John." She found the juxtaposition more than amusing. The august protector of the forest, all animals and trees, with a name tag. Then, on top of wearing a name tag, he was going by John. If she were not in awe, she would have asked if he chose the last name Doe or Smith. In the following episode, we learn more about Papa Bois and the relationship between the Soucouyant and Papa Bois, and generally learn more about the kind.